Are you ready to ace your recruiting coordinator interview? Check out this video right now and get some tips and tricks. Hey, welcome to the Millionaire Recruiter. I'm Brianna Rooney, your Millionaire Recruiter. And if you have not seen this channel before, it is all about upping your game in the recruiting industry. So we have here Ashley from Talent Perch for the second week in a row, which is really exciting because really the recruiting coordinator, again called RC, is the first way to get, and the best way, in my opinion, at this point, is to get into the recruiting industry. Of course, there's all sorts of ways, but Ashley actually came from a really interesting background, as you heard last week, and it was more of a medical background. She didn't have really any recruiting experience, but as we saw, that this role is really entails a lot of moving parts and works a lot with the hiring manager and a lot with the recruiter. So really, when you're going from an RC to recruiter, that transition can be very easy. And so what we're going to talk about today is how to ace your recruiting coordinator interview. So welcome again, Ashley.
Thank you for having me, Brianna. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Okay. So as we found out that being an RC, it entails strict attention to detail. So with what we'll do is we'll just I'll ask you a few questions that we know are in that interview. And as everyone knows that there are tons of different answers for this, but I want you to hear a perspective of someone who not only was an RC, but passed that interview with flying colors without having any experience. So that's really important. How's that sound?
That sounds great. That sounds awesome.
Okay, cool. So first things first, like with any interview, it's very nerve-wracking, right?
Yes.
So let's take a moment just to talk about that for a second. How do you get over your nerves? How do you tackle that?
Well, I kind of see it in the same way that if I was, usually I get nervous at the beginning, and then afterwards, I'm probably like 15 seconds in, I'm like, okay, actually I'm talking up a storm. So it's just kind of mentally preparing and understanding that you're being you, and that's the most important thing, is to be transparent and you being you. And I feel like you can feel that even through Zoom.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what's interesting with the remote world in general, is it's all video. And so I know that a lot of people freeze up a little bit more via video, which I recommend. And I know that this is painful, but I've done it so you can do it, is I record myself and then rewatch it. I rewatch myself like 3 times, and trust me, it's like nails on a chalkboard, but you have to do it. You have to see what you look like. You have to see, it's hard to look at the camera, but then look at the person. And, there's all sorts of things. So there's a whole Zoom etiquette that can go to it, which, by the way, is one of my videos. So check that out for sure. All right, cool. Well, let's get to it. So Ashley, nice to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome.
Good. So now let's just pretend we got through all the niceties, because there are niceties. What I want to know is, how do you work through adversity?
So I just want to kind of start off with, I remember the tip that I was given when I went through the recruiter screen, and it was to jot down as many examples as you possibly can in whatever it is that you're doing. So that's exactly what I did. I wrote down so many different things from my current workflow. And so I worked with different, doctors, nurses, and a bigger team than I actually worked with as a recruiting coordinator. So I actually wrote down so many examples of how I, communicated within the doctors and all the nurses and even my teammates. So I specifically wrote down difficulties within, communication, things like that. And for me, that's really what helped me to kind of, plan and set aside a lot of different, what would you call it? Just plan out and map out the way that things are going to flow, for the interview.
Yeah, for sure. And so what's nice about that is you can never be too prepared, but you don't want to be robotic, right? So having all of those different examples is really great, because you really don't know what kind of questions they're going to ask, but you have to go back to think, okay, what is my job going to be? So for example, with an RC, there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong, that can go right, and an RC is in charge of that. Again, not too many people know about. So I'm glad that you brought up, how do you communicate with your peers? Because that's really important, because you're communicating with different departments in different levels, which is really interesting. So, okay, if I'm asking you, how can you work with someone high up in an organization and not feel like flustered?
So all around, I would say that you would need to, it's just about talking as well, like the same way you talk to your manager, right? Mm-hmm. You come up with a plan, you come up with, a solution, and you talk about how you executed the plan and why you set that solution. Because I feel like in any situation when you're having difficulties, it's mm-hmm. easy to just get flustered rather than to actually just, plan, solution, let's talk about it, let's communicate. And I think that's what an interviewer wants to see as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that's the key, right? Everyone wants to be like, no one wants to walk on eggshells. Everyone wants to make sure that you answer the question, get to the point, and move on. So that's really important. And that's actually something that I heard just the other day, which was very unfortunate. Someone got passed on because they explained too much. They were deemed long-winded. And I think that comes from, in the recruiting industry and probably every industry at this point, because everyone's like understaffed, is, people want to move fast. Like that's the most efficient thing to do, but you don't want to miss details, but you still have to move. And so no one wants to sit there and be like, oh my God, you just told me that same story like 3 times. Can we move forward? And that comes with putting people in a very interesting spot, because if you do have a good relationship with that person, you should be able to say, okay, great, we touched on that. Let's move on to this. You should be able to have those conversations, but human nature people don't like confrontation. So when someone is interviewing and the interviewee notices, God, they're long-winded, I'm going to have to cut them off all the time. Mm-hmm. They're going to be like, I'm going to be put in basically situations on a regular basis that I don't want to be put in.
Yes, that makes sense. I went through a lot of that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I'll ask you, and for sure every RC interviewer asks this, is how do you stay organized in your day?
So tying into when I was writing down my notes and going through my workflow, that I remember I wrote so many different kinds of different things that I did. I didn't even realize all the things that I did in a day up until I was actually analyzing everything. So when I wrote it down and I was like, oh my gosh, okay. Even the next day I was able to see that and make a better use of my time. So within the, I remember scheduling was very different. So I could be within phone calls. At first I go in, I check my phone, see if I have any voicemails. Second, I'm checking my emails. Third, I'm checking my work queue. And then fourth, that's the ideal scenario every day. But in my case, things always change. And that's kind of what it is in recruiting as well. And recruiting coordinating, that's what it is as well. You're going to look at emails, you're going to look at your calendar, the interviews that you have going on, that calendar. So it's really important you're going to get, reschedules, you're going to get people needing your attention ASAP, you're going to have meetings. So you're not always going to have the best way to manage it, but it's just about kind of setting yourself up at least from the beginning of, okay, we're doing this first, this second, this third. That way you can handle, the overwhelming small details.
Okay. So do you have that like written down on a Post-it on your computer? Like how does that actually work? Or you just memorize it?
So I did write it down at first, and then I had it in a little piece of paper on my desk. And I actually had so many different things on my desk that so many documents. So I would print them out and things to help me out throughout the day. So just of information and phone numbers that I needed to call, and just to make things easier. I think that for me, it was afterwards just more memorization. I was like, okay, this is what we got to do. And then it made it easier to be able to detect everything else coming in.
Good. Okay. So you just kind of segued into a very important question for all recruiting coordinators is how do you deal with your day changing so often? Priorities shift all the time. So how do you deal with change?
It's just about touching base. I feel like within, let's say you work for 2 hours and you know exactly the things that you write down, everything that you need to get done, and then you go back to it. And I feel like keeping track of your time, which is like, whether it's notes, whether it's a graph, whether it's Excel sheets, however, even notes, your app, on your desktop. I think whatever for you is useful, use it, because throughout the day, just go back and check and make sure, okay, I was done with this. Cause I actually had a notepad, like a physical notepad that I wrote down every single thing I needed to get done. So if things came in throughout that, I would always just, at the end of the day, I have all of these things that I have written down that I need to make sure that I finish.
Okay, another great segue here. And I'm just so happy this is flowing this way, because as an interviewer, I'm thinking, okay, I know what my RC is going to want to do, but you're kind of touching on something that I do that I teach not to do. So I too have a notebook. I've got tons of Post-its. If you could see my desk right now, you'd be like, Brianna, what are you doing? So in the world of technology, especially since, as everyone knows, I'm doing sexy tech, but there's RCs in every single industry, right? Just same with recruiters in every single industry. So if they use tech, like a ClickUp, for example, to stay organized and to be able to put the change through directly to you very quickly. So how do you adapt to technology and make sure you're still like being held accountable to your team and they know what you're doing?
That is a great question, because I remember when I first got into the RC position, I was kind of at certain points there, it was harder to track certain things. And I was just more so learning the flow of it. So in Greenhouse, when I was learning Greenhouse, so I didn't know exactly all the functions of it. And when I first started, I wasn't using the reminders. So that would automatically remind me, oh, hey, we need to send this confirmation. Oh, hey, let's follow up with this candidate. And that upped my game really fast. It just made life a lot easier, because the recruiters were asking me like, hey, was this sent? And I was like, yeah, I was going to get to that, but I had it in my notes. So it was easier and faster and just a lot more efficient to have those reminders just sent to me, because I'd be like, okay, once again, let me send this real quick and then let's go back. So I had to adapt to that, coming from healthcare, which we didn't have reminders like those. We didn't have, I used Epic. So Epic, there was no reminders. It was just what we entered information into. So I didn't have anything like that. It was just my notebook. And then going into this, it's like about mainly how fast you learn the technology and the software.
So how can one answer that question? Like, so I remember when I first started, I was like, oh, well, I may have, stretched the truth a little bit. I barely knew how to use the computer. I literally typed with my two little pecker fingers here. I didn't know how to use Outlook, but that's what they were on. And so how would you handle that question? Because like you said, like you come from using Epic, and then in RC, especially in tech, they're definitely using some more powerful tools, which is great. And I think a lot of companies are starting to use. So how can you really answer that question? How well do you adapt to technology?
So I would first start off with giving the information on the software that you've used before. And if you haven't, like, even if it's Word, something like that, or using Excel, things like that, or, usually every company, depending on the industry, has their own, system. So if coming from that, if you don't have any at all, any info on that, I would say, then I would just emphasize how willing to learn that you are, or how fast you learn and how efficient you will be in learning, and just emphasizing how you're open to that and how you want to learn it and you're really quick. And, I think that kind of answers the question. I've said that before in my interviews.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So then we'll end here. So I'm thinking I'm having this great interview with you. You've already touched on things, which is really great, that hopefully everyone is listening to, is that Ashley's answering questions before I even get to ask those questions. So she's very thorough. She not only answers the question that I'm looking for, but then she spreads a little bit more seeds to give more context, which is really great. And that's the way to flow any interview. You want to ace any interview, you keep talking and you keep kind of just giving a little tidbit more information, but not too much. Because again, you don't want to be long-winded and the person's like, I don't even know what question I asked. So then the interviewer and the person doing the interview is like thrown off, and then you don't want them to be thrown off. So it's all interesting. But so I would basically say, okay, great. Actually, this is fantastic. We were kind of hoping that we could get an RC that was already one. So why should I take a chance on you?
Okay. This question, there will be, I would say, companies that are like, we want specific RC experience. And the most important thing that I would say is express all of the skills that it takes to be an RC, and again, reiterate that you have that, and explaining to the interviewer, like, I actually have this and that, and I've done this and that. Like, I've had peers that were in dental front desk, I've had peers that were hospitality, they were doing scheduling reservations. All of that translates, and you can always find out what translates to that. So do your research, I would say, in terms of, your examples. Have examples for every question. I think that's the most important thing to prepare, because that way, like, I remember I was asked the same question in 2 different ways. So I had to have 2 different examples for that question. So I would just write down everything that you encounter for yourself throughout your days, like issues arise, anything that comes about with your managers or communication skills. In an RC position, they want to know how you communicate the best with everybody, all the interviewers, and not just interviewers, but like hiring managers, VPs. You have of different levels, and they're going to ask about the different levels. So, one might be a VP, and then another one is, it doesn't really matter what level it is. They want to know, how you handle those situations and how you talk to them and how you keep your composure.
Yeah, for sure. So I would say, just to kind of sum it up, and please add if you have any more, but in order to really pass and ace that, recruiting coordinator interview, you need to be very clear to answer, how do you communicate? How do you communicate on different levels in organizations? Give examples, like Ashley said. How quickly can you adapt to a different day? So like, people like to be organized, and in general, a lot of people don't like change. So I think an RC really has to thrive in a very fast moving, changing environment. That's really important. And they also, I feel, have to chameleon their personality. So how you get that across to say, like, look, I can adapt very quickly. I might have used XYZ that doesn't translate, but I learned this way. And then I can also, morph my personality to talk to candidates versus talking to recruiters versus talking to hiring managers, even speed in the way that you talk. So I'm sure everyone that's watched my videos know I talk very fast. So if I'm talking to a recruiter, I actually talk faster than if I'm talking to a client. I actually do slow my roll a little bit. So, and actually, any last tips to ace this RC interview?
That's awesome work. I think that even kind of going based off of that, as an RC, you're a scheduler, you're in customer service, you're kind of like a life coach, you're kind of, just a cheerleader, you're doing admin, you're doing all these different kinds of things. So also what I would highly recommend is being genuine and being empathetic, because I know that interviewers want to see that empathy, that's really important, and just be yourself.
Nice. Oh, I love it. You left us with empathy, which is a whole other video, everybody. But empathy is needed in the workplace so dearly. And then something that I actually touched on, and I swear I won't tangent, but yesterday I went over, wow, we actually need to start learning how to be empathetic via email and Slack and any other communication that we're doing, because we're living in this remote world and we're not in front of people. For me, I find it very easy to be empathetic in person or even in via video, but how are we showing that via email? So whole other subject. So thank you, Ashley, so much. So we'll leave you with this. Hopefully this helps you ace your recruiting coordinator interview and gets you into the most amazing industry, which is the recruiting industry, so you can change all sorts of lives. I will see you every Thursday at noon. And don't forget that money is just the vessel that gets you to do all the amazing things you want to go do in life. Go live it. See you next week.